Hi, I'm a higher ed CMO and I have a confession to make. I'm actually really interested in how AI is completely changing how students search for and research colleges. This can actually have a profound impact on the student journey in ways that are evolving honestly on a day by day basis. And that's why I'm really excited about the conversation I just had with Jason Smith about how AI search is pulling in answers that it's giving to the folks who are researching your schools, whether that's in ChatGPT, Gemini, or elsewhere. He's the founder and managing director of OHO, which is a digital agency dedicated to higher education. For over 20 years, he has led a team of strategists, designers, UX researchers, marketers, and developers who help colleges and universities solve their complex digital challenges, from launching major websites to driving enrollment through digital marketing. I think you're really going to get a lot from this conversation. I hope you enjoy. You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast where marketing minds in higher ed come to pull back the curtain, spill a little tea, and talk honestly about what it takes to market in this industry. I'm Jaime Hunt, the founder of Solve Higher Ed, author of Heart Over Hype, and a former campus CMO who spent more than 2 decades navigating the weird, wonderful world of higher education marketing. This show is for the strategists, the storytellers, the change agents, and anyone who has ever tried to get Faculty Senate on board with a rebrand. Here we get candid about the challenges and share the ideas that are shaping the future of our field. Sound like your kind of conversation? Then let's get into it. Hey, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I'm really excited about this conversation. We've been talking about this for a couple of months now, trying to find a chance that works for both of us to talk about this. But I'm really fascinated. OHO is rolling out something you're calling the AI Visibility Scorecard. And
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Sure. Yeah, I think our intent here was we were getting questions from our clients about sort of how are we showing up in AI and where is that coming from was actually the question we heard the most from people. And so what we wanted to do was understand what is the source that AI is using to write answers about your institution. So we didn't want to just know are you showing up in AI in general? That's interesting, but it's not really helpful from a prospective student point of view. And so what we wanted to do was develop a tool to say, if I'm a prospective student, where is these LLM models getting the information to present to our school? And is it coming from the school website, a third-party source, news? And so what we're able to do is actually provide some answers and some benchmarks for people to help them understand where their answers are coming from and then what they can do to change that.
This seems incredibly helpful. Somebody was recently saying to me, their organic traffic had gone way down.
Yeah.
And they didn't know why, because somehow they missed that AI is having this impact. It's really challenging, I think, with the sands shifting every day and how all of this is working to stay on top of that.
I think of AI as an extension of something we've talked about for a couple of years on the SEO side, which is kind of the zero-click search phenomena, which means basically that people would search in Google and then not click through to anything, right? Whether that's an overview or another website or a knowledge panel that Google's providing. And I think now with AI overviews in Gemini or in Google search, I think those are becoming even more of a problem in terms of people being able to just find the answer and not have to click through to your website. And so, and same thing if you're in ChatGPT, you're generally getting an answer right there that you feel that feels pretty good, and you're not validating it and you're not checking it. So that it is certainly seeing the traffic drop off, and then also seeing the kind of increase in terms of the leads that we're seeing too, of just traffic sources coming inbound from ChatGPT or other LLM models. We're certainly seeing an increase of that information as well.
There's so many things to talk about with that. This idea of just not validating what you get in your ChatGPT results. I mean, I think there's some pretty heavy, big issues with that. But I mean, it's true. I use ChatGPT all day, every day, and I'm not always validating the sources and all of that. But I was recently talking to a friend of mine who's looking at grad schools, and she did her entire search within ChatGPT, asking it, find me this information and compare these two programs and what are
Yeah.
the strengths and weakness of this, and never once visited the websites.
Well, I think, I think there's the world today where, we did some research like about 12 months ago at this point. We just are starting to run the same survey again this year to see how students are using it. And I would say what I saw 12 months ago was like a lot of what I called Google style questions in ChatGPT when we were asking people. So like they're just asking the same question that they might have asked in Google in ChatGPT. So like, what's the deadline? What's the application rate or the admissions rate, right? I think where we're going and like where we're starting to think is like, okay, let's think 3-4 years down the road when we have more of an AI agent. And you could imagine you set up an agent for yourself that is, you've given it all that information, just like your friend's kind of manually typing in now, but you're saying, here's my GPA, here's my background, here's my work experience, here's where I want to go with my career, here's how much I can afford to pay for. And the agent is just going out and finding different sorts of schools. Well, I think that's the thing people are not thinking about. Like, how do I get ready for that? Like, how do I make sure that my content is in the AI agent or in the AI models or being able to be found by an AI model? Because that's the kind of, discovery that is going to happen. And then the question we're asking too is, okay, when that happens, like, what should your website be like? Because now your website is this interesting world of needs to provide the information to the AI models, but also like, well, where in the customer journey is that changing as we're going forward? So like, that's kind of what we're thinking about as we're planning for the future with this AI search.
Where are you finding that students are putting websites in the journey, or is this still evolving? It hasn't like come into like a common practice yet.
So I think right now you're still seeing students use the website. I think one change that we've seen is like when we first started doing research around customer journey and mapping 15 years ago, like we saw sort of discovery happen sort of off the website. Like, is this school on my short list? Basically, the website was a place that you validated the things that you were looking for, and you got a sense of the place. Like the undergraduate students were asking, what's it going to be like? And they found that on the website. I think one shift we've seen is that what's it going to be like is now like over on social or it's on discussion boards and these things that, quote, seem more authentic to them at some level, right? But there is a way that they're evaluating that feeling. I think the other thing we're seeing is the websites is a kind of desire from both the AI and from students for a much more direct experience. And by that, I mean, they want to kind of get in and get out and find those answers. And you can see some of that even just in the way mobile behavior, right? Like we don't usually type in URLs and manage navigating a site through using the menus. We're like Googling the answer, trying to find the thing. We don't like it. We Google it again. We found it, right? Like you're navigating by content on the page. Like I can't remember the last time I've used a menu on on a website on my phone, right? I just go and try again if I can't find it. And so this sort of much more direct, I'm looking for an answer in and out experience, I think is changing. So I think we're seeing a little less of some of like wanting that, what's the experience going to be like on the website? And I think people are finding their answers in other spots. And then I think we're also just really wanting to get to direct answers and really clear information on the website.
It's so funny you mentioned that using the menu on mobile. There was a website I was visiting this week where I was trying to find something, couldn't find it. And I was like, oh, right, there's a menu. Like it didn't even occur to me to click
that little
on the
hamburger line up there. Yeah, that thing, we could click on it. Yeah.
Like, oh, there's the content. And that has definitely evolved, I think, over the past, how old's the iPhone? I mean, 2008 or something like that?
2008, yeah.
I think a lot of CMOs are still thinking about visibility in terms of Google search and Google rankings. I see a lot of potential risk of treating AI as just another channel. And I'm curious about what you think some of the risks might be of looking at it that way.
I think we do have to think about visibility overall, like where are we seen? And right, again, like how do we show up in Google? How do we show in AI overviews? How do we show up on Reddit? How do we show up in social? Like there's all these other realms, right? And so there's social listening and other things like that. But I do think we have to think about like, what is that customer journey that the students are really on? And what are the questions they're really looking for? And I think this is the question we're really trying to answer is where are those students in their journey? What questions are they asking? And then how are you showing up in these different areas? And are you satisfied with that? And so I think really what we're trying to answer for folks is we know that we have a whole user research group at OHO. And so we have done thousands of one-on-one interviews to understand how students do research. And we've watched them go through websites, and we've surveyed over 80,000 kids doing different sorts of research. We have a pretty good, clear picture on what questions they're asking and how you want how you want your answers to show up. And so I think we use all of that as we kind of use this AI Visibility Scorecard to really understand what kind of information is coming back. Good news is almost all of that, when it's a branded search, if your school name is in there, is actually coming from your website. Like a very high percentage is coming from the website. The next question is really, do you like the answers that you have there? And if it's coming from your website, is it good content? Is it contradictory content? Is it up-to-date content? And then when it's not coming from your website, where do you have gaps? And I think that's what's been really interesting, is like, there's a lot of areas that, frankly, I think would be just good content to have in general on your website that the AI Visibility Scorecard is actually turning up to say, like, we don't actually talk about our faculty at all. Maybe we should be having just some general information about that, because that's a common question. And so I think it's been interesting to see just where there's kind of blind spots on the website right now, and people not paying attention to that.
That seems like a perfect way to sort of spotlight what you have missing. And
Right.
like back in the olden days when I was a director of web strategy, I remember like finding all this horrible old content, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it would usually be like on the third or fourth page of results.
Right.
So we wouldn't get too worried about it. But
Right.
that's not the case with AI anymore. And I think that's kind of unsettling. Like when CMOs have this sense of they don't actually know what AI is saying about them, because it might be something that was way buried in a Google search that surfaced the top. And I'm really curious, like, what has surprised you about what you found when you do these scorecards?
A couple things that I think are really stand out is, one, the majority of information, as I said, tends to come from that. Information that's not coming is reputation-based content. So I think this is one thing that is just not really pulled. It's kind of hard to write about like how you're better than somebody else, but certainly outcomes, which I think schools, just even from a straight up content strategy perspective, always struggle with. Well, the problem is that's generally being pulled from other sources now. And so I think we need to sharpen up our outcomes game as a kind of industry that way around that, and really make sure we're pulling that. The second is a lot of data that is just sort of what I would consider like iPads type data is being pulled from third-party sites. People are not putting that on their own site. They're not talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think you need to figure out how to, if it's not what you want, you got to figure out how to contextualize that and talk about it. And it's not necessarily bad. I think that it's pulling from someplace else as long as it's accurate. But if you want to manage that message or control it, I think we should talk about what that looks like. And then you're exactly right. To give you a good anecdote about this, there was one client, and we had run a kind of set of queries on their behalf. So we wrote some custom questions, ran those queries through our tool, and it came back with 5 programs. And I was like, well, that looks like a pretty good answer. And we showed it to the VP, and they immediately said, 4 of those are great, and that last one we haven't had for years.
Wow.
And we were like, oh, interesting. Like, where did it come from? Right. And we dug in, and it actually came from a blog that had been published when that program went live.
Wow.
And then it had been shut down. Right. But the way it was presented in the answer was like these 5 all looked exactly the same. So they're structured the same. As you said, if you didn't run down the source on that, you would have never known. But if I'd searched that and clicked it, you would have been like, well, this blog's from 2017. Like, I should probably like just go over to the program finder and see if it's really there. But the risk is like it doesn't show up. Now think about that kind of content hygiene problem over and over again. And I think this kind of winnowing of content is something that higher ed does really need to, unfortunately, think about much more aggressively at this point.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you an incredibly unfair question.
Okay.
And it's unfair because for listeners who maybe don't know, I'm currently the fractional interim chief marketing officer at Agnes Scott College. And we're actually a client of OHO's on an SEO project. So I'm going to ask you this question. Is SEO still relevant?
Oh, yeah, 100%. So I would say right now, I think, and we've had some lively debates in the office recently around like what's good SEO practice and does good SEO practice spurn over into good AI? I mean, I think, running what's really cool is like the AI tool, and I'm a nerd when it comes to this stuff. Like we're actually able to pull the JSON, the sort of code view of what is happening, and seeing all the kind of internal conversations that an AI chatbot has when it goes to form an answer for you. And it's effectively what it's doing all the time is it does this thing called a web run, which is a search. So basically what it's doing is it's still just doing searches on the sites to pull that content. And so is that important? Absolutely. And I think good SEO practices are only going to be good sort of AI like findability things. Right now, there's some debate, I think, around how to structure your pages in ways that are actually better for AI. So we've been running some internal tests, and we've got a webinar coming up next week on this, but around schema and does schema help? Does it not help? But we are finding some information around sort of the page structure and like how much it reads at the top of the page versus the bottom of the page, how perhaps some clearer labeling on things or being more breaking stuff out into like little, we call it like a little nutrition fact. Like if you've got a program at the top, like what's the cost? What's the duration? What's this? And clearly labeling those might have some impact. Like these are the different layouts that we're testing to think about. Just as I'm making a good web page, like what makes it good for humans and what makes it good for SEO and what makes it good for AI. And there's a lot of overlap about what makes that useful for all of us. But I think as good SEO practices are certainly a good spot to start in that area. And especially what we're seeing with Google, and when we're doing some comparisons between ChatGPT and Gemini, like Gemini is still using, it leverages all of the power of Google's last 25 years to how it's good at doing that stuff. It's using all of that and layering a natural layer presentation on the top of that.
Well, that's fantastic. It makes sense to me as someone who back in the olden days used to do SEO work, that would be impactful, but that you probably have to kind of shift how you do it a little bit just to address some of that AI search. So honestly, that's a question I get a lot. Like, is this still relevant? And I'm glad to hear from SEO expert that is still a thing. From your research, you found that about 60% of prospective undergraduates are using AI in the college search process, which honestly feels a little bit low to me. But how are they using it differently than how they maybe used to search or even how they used to use social media?
Yeah, and I think this is what I'm super interested in doing more research on and really understanding how much they're using it, right? Like I think we saw a lot of like, hey, I use it for my homework and I use it for other stuff. But when it came to searching, like, I think that discoverability is still sort of new for them in terms of Googling or looking for answers that way. So I think when we got to AI, like I felt like that number was low too, but I think I'm really interested to see, now 12 months out from some of that data, like what does that really look like? And how much has that really changed? I just saw a stat, this week in terms of someone just looking at inbound traffic on a kind of website over the last like 3 or 4 months and just really seeing the amount of inbound traffic from ChatGPT coming in is accelerating like a 45-degree line right up.
Wow.
So I think, right, like that's just a phenomenal like change in terms of discoverability and finding that information. So
I want to pivot just a little bit and kind of go back to the idea of those results. So as the students are using these tools to get results, I think I mentioned that friend of mine that fully used it for a grad school search. I'm really curious about what kind of inaccuracy may show up in results that could have a really negative impact, whether that's on enrollment, yield, anti-melt, overall reputation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think as I said, I think one area that schools are not really great at is sort of like the reputation and outcomes piece. And I think this is just a weak spot. I think being really clear about like what you can expect, what that would look like, how that would go. I think one area that I'm seeing is you might want to think about some third-party sources or validation for this. So if you worked with like Poets and Quants or somebody else like that, I think if you've got a kind of profile or an article or something over there that's about your reputation or even allows you to be compared to a couple schools over there, like we're seeing it get picked up from that kind of information. And so one, I think if you own that or have kind of pay to play kind of access to something or can get some articles published about your outcomes someplace else, that can be really helpful in terms of influencing that. I think some of the other areas that we see just weakness is sort of general, sort of what's the experience going to be like from a student experience. It goes to Wikipedia a lot. So I think looking at your Wikipedia and making sure that that's up to date. Like if it can't find the information, we're seeing it frequent. ChatGPT is frequently going there. It does use Reddit, not as much as I would have thought. And even when we got the Gemini views running, I would have thought that YouTube was going to be playing a much bigger portion in that. But not, you might get a handful out of 100 sort of sources for a particular set of questions. We might see like 6, I think, was the highest like YouTube reference. So that's out of 20 questions, 6 responses had some sort of influence from YouTube, which was surprised me in terms of what we were looking at. So I think, generally, I think, it's looking at your website. I think that's a good source of information. But I think you also have to be aware of when we're asking more comparative type questions, like your friend was asking of which one is better, which one would be better for me. It is not doing some sort of like deep thinking of like, oh, I'm going to pull all this information together and then I'm really going to process you. It will use what's available. So if you know there are comparison articles about you or anything else about there, it's going to lean on that sort of what we call like these higher ed aggregator type sites that have written about it. And another area that we find gets tagged a lot is people that do some sort of college counseling or coaching. Because they all have written blogs to kind of pull in students and attract, customers on their side. And a lot of them are about like, which school is better for you? And like, there's a lot of that kind of content in that world. So I think it's worth exploring just to know what's out there and then thinking about how you might be able to counter some of that by putting that on your site or finding a third party where you could do an interview, put some of their information, pay to get something up there. Those are options for you.
All right, time for a quick break to share something big happening this summer. If you're tired of the same old conference buzz and want real playbooks and real momentum, you need to make it to Charlotte, North Carolina for Engage Summit 2026 this June 15th to 17th. Engage Summit is where you can take the next step toward building the agentic campus with strategies you can start implementing today, workshops that sharpen your skills, and a community dedicated to transforming how higher ed supports and serves students. Whether you lead enrollment, student success, marketing, or tech, this is where higher ed stops talking about AI and starts implementing it. And the best part? Enrollify listeners like you can grab a ticket for 50% off. Yes, that is right, 50% off. Head to engage.element451.com and use code HUNT50. That's HUNT50. Register now and build what's next. Now let's get back to the show. I guess a tiny bit surprised that Reddit isn't showing up more. I buy nothing without looking at Reddit. Like that's my okay, before I, pull the trigger on something, I'm looking to see even a hotel, which hotel am I going to stay at? Let's just make sure nobody on Reddit has mentioned bed bugs or something.
You want to avoid those.
No. So with all this said, can you kind of walk us through how the scorecard works? What does somebody get at the end of this?
Sure. We pick an audience. So let's say undergraduate prospect. We have a sort of question bank that we run towards that. We can pick a set of competitors, either kind of your peers, or we can pick a sort of standard benchmark. So like, large regional universities. So we have one that's like all the R2, Carnegie R2 schools. So we've run a benchmark to understand, and we look at it across sort of 8 different categories, which are, things that you would be thinking about, like academics, admissions, aid, student life, community life, reputation, outcomes, athletics. So it's looking at all that, the kind of the categories of questions around those areas. And then we look at where are the sources. So you're able to be able to see, great, for the academics questions, 73% of your answers came from your website. How many came from another EDU? How many came from a higher ed aggregator? How many came from national media? And then sort of social, which we have like Reddit and, all the social channels, and Wikipedia is in there as well. So where are those coming from? I would say surprising numbers of things that come out of that as being true is like, we've run hundreds of these at this point. And I would say in general, most of the content is coming from your website. As I've said already, I think reputation is always the lowest one for people. Athletics it's also pulling a lot from your athletic site, so you'll want to look at that. But that's a site that you kind of have under your control in some way. National media also always very low. We're not seeing it pull. And I think a lot of that is because many of those things are behind a paywall. So you have to remember, like, there's no New York Times, there's no Washington Post, it's pulling from things like Times of India, or it pulls from, a little bit from CNN, time.com as it shows up there sometimes. So you get some stuff like that, but a lot of national media stuff is behind a paywall. And so it's not getting that. Also, no social media, right? So really, unless you're pulling from Google, who's got YouTube, or if you're using some sort of Facebook one, which is going to have access to that, you really don't, it's not pulling your Twitter feeds. It's not pulling LinkedIn. But what we are seeing it pulling some of that content really from is things like LinkedIn pages or LinkedIn articles, because those are public, but it's not reading a post, right? So anything that has if you go to your school's LinkedIn section, right? That's just a straight up HTML page on LinkedIn, and it will be able to index that, but it can't read anything you've posted, any profiles, any of that sort of stuff. So it shows you sort of where you are. And so at the end of the day, you get a benchmark of understanding how your school is comparing against other schools, whether you're up above, which I think is helpful from hey, your cabinet's really worried about this. You can be like, we're on par with everybody else here. So I understand there's some unusual answers, but we can point you back to where those are and then pinpoint what we can do with those.
I'm really glad you brought up that benchmarking piece, because I just feel like it's an incomplete picture without being able to see how you compare to some others. And I know from experience, if I'd gone to a board and only showed where we were, they'd be like, well, there's no context to this. How do I know if we're doing well?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some people have been like, oh, I thought we'd be higher. And I was like, you're pretty much where everyone is. So, I mean, I think, it does really vary, and we've run it with different school sizes. I think this was something I was super curious about. Great, if you're a top 100 university and have a huge web ecosystem versus you're a small liberal arts college with under 2,000 students, the numbers generally about the same. The trend lines are almost the same. The reputation for the small kind of liberal arts schools is lower. They have even less about themselves on their sites. But in general, the trend line looks almost the same, and they're in the same ballpark. This was not 20 or 30 points below for each of those areas.
I imagine that the content on your site needing to be, to me, it needs to be perfect and really needs to hit all of those key points. I'm working with a client that's a college within a university on a brand project. And one of the things I did was visit their competitors and see how they're talking about themselves on their websites. And two of the competitors I was looking at had almost no brand content on their site at all. It was all just informational. This is our curriculum. These are the degrees. This is our listing of our faculty, but nothing really, to your point earlier, talking about outcomes, talking about, how they're ranking in different areas, how much research. I had to find all of that sort of external to their website. And so, I mean, yes, that may be pulled into a ChatGPT research that you're doing, but it feels like that content would be important to have on your site. Or am I totally off on that?
Well, this is where I go back to it's customer journey driven, right? So I think thinking, what do people need to make a decision to attend this school, right? And I think you should have that content on the site. I mean, I think that's really what we're measuring. And that's based, again, we go back to our user research. So 10 years of customer journey work. We know what questions people are asking. We see them ask it again and again. And there's always some nuance, but we're using that as our base, right? To really understand, well, are the right answers showing up, and are you able to make any impact on changing that content? So I'm with you. I feel like you should have some of that content there because it's important to people. Otherwise, just send them to your course catalog and call it a day, right? So.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to just replicate your course catalog on your website. And that's a conversation I'm sure we have both had with people.
Yeah. Well, and just on that point, it's actually this is one of the bigger kind of learnings or academic points, is that when you have a program page and you've got a course catalog, it does lean over there, which sometimes is fine, but sometimes those two get a little out of sync. And so I think you're not going to get rid of your course catalog, but you might maybe hide it from search, or you might move it to a different directory. I think another area where we're seeing a split in content is internal content versus external content. In the last year and a half, we've done a number of projects to actually create what I'm kind of a public intranet, if you will, right? So it's content that's probably already on your website that should be available for your faculty, your staff, your current students, but is frankly just buried somewhere or mixed in with content that's really for prospects. And I think one of the things, and I think this is helpful for, again, users and for AI, let's separate that content. Let's create a good experience over here for faculty, staff, current students. Let's organize it well. Let's put a nice UX on it. And it doesn't need to be a fancy, detailed page, with all the photos and everything. Really, we're there to transact. We're there to find some information. So let's create a kind of public intranet, if you will, to allow people to kind of get the information that they need. But that also helps you, again, and when I go back to what did users want? They want a more direct experience. Well, great. Now we can give them a more direct experience, those prospects, because we've pulled all that internal content out. And that actually helps, right? Separate out those two areas and thinking through that process as you go forward. So
when you have a CMO to take a look at their scorecard, what is the first action you're typically recommending they take? And is there something that they are leaning towards doing that you think, no, you should do this instead?
Generally, so what's really interesting is most people are like, this is super interesting, right? I think that's overwhelming, the first response. People are like, they're so curious, and to have any kind of, frankly, perspective on how AI might be impacting them. I think everyone is sort of in a bit of a frenzy around wanting to understand that, and a bit overwhelmed of just what do we really do? I think the next steps are really sort of, and what we tend to provide is another report. So you get kind of your scorecard, and then you get a kind of action report, if you will. And that is really our team looking at the analysis of the information and going through that to find really what are the next steps you should do it's kind of like a content audit. And so you do end up with things like, here are some gaps that we're seeing in the content. So one area we see are there's some zero sources. There's actually no answer that was returned, either from public information or from your site. Now, some of those just might not be relevant to the school, and so we'll just scratch those off. There are gaps, as I was mentioning, with one school we were looking at, there were gaps with just explaining the faculty relationship, just at a kind of high level. There was little information around sort of DEI or support or mental health sort of issues, understanding there's some dynamics in the market around who wants that on their website right now. But just to say, those answers are gaps in terms of things that people are asking about. So we're trying to look at that sort of information. Then we're also looking at where is it pulling from third-party sources that you might actually have a profile, perhaps you have a niche profile or something like that. Great. Here's a list of sites that you should go and frankly go check out and see, is it up to date? Are you doing the right information? Again, you have control over that. And then we're also providing a list of, here's areas where there's a heavy reliance on other sites to answer those questions. And these are opportunities for you to consider about adding some content to your site if you feel like you need to counter something or just have a voice or a point of view on that.
I love how actionable this sounds like it is for folks, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Knowing what is happening is one thing, but then knowing how to change what is happening to your advantage, I think, is a whole nother thing. And so it sounds like this kind of gives you what you need in that space. I'm really curious about your perspective. And we talked before we started recording about, you've been in this business for, I think you said 27 years. And I know you have seen change and evolution like crazy. If you look ahead 2 to 3 years, how do you think AI and AI search and all of that is going to change what is a strong higher ed website?
If you're thinking about redesigning your site, I would think about how you're providing structured content, right? And so how are you building good content and pulling that in? The next is, how are you cutting out content that frankly is not important? And I think a really critical conversation for people to be having is, hey, we're supporting this, department section, and it's just not adding any marketing value to it. And my question is, why is marketing in charge of that? And why is marketing in charge of spending services on that? If we're really trying to enroll more students and you're having to support something that's not supporting that, there's a kind of tension there. And so I think as we're thinking about the website, like how do we winnow that down to really being focused? And then how do we put that in a structured format? And I'm looking forward to a time, like there's going to be a time in the next 3 to 5 years when we're all going to have something that looks like ChatGPT running on our website.
Yeah.
You need to have your content ready because you need to feed that into ChatGPT now on your site. So there's no way for me to tell ChatGPT, here's my stream of data right now. But if you run something on your site, you do have control over what sources are going in. And like our client, they might not want to put their blog in there because it's got old info, right? And so they're going to need to know. But we need to provide that structured content from other areas to put that into a website. And so cleaning up that content is like preparing for that future. And it's also getting your content ready for like, how is it going to be ingested or read or scanned? And so I think that's really the part we were looking for. And as I said at the earlier part, I'm thinking about like trying to look forward into like what's happening in commerce modes, what are happening in other like places outside of higher ed. I tend to look and say, how are they doing it? And what do we need to prepare for? Like, how do we need to get our content ready? But also, how are people's buying behaviors and expectations changing that they're going to, have that sort of zero-click experience and live in one world to just go do this, make all my choices, figure out my schools, take a look at the list. When are they going to jump over to the website? And I think that's an area that, like, when we think about our user research, that's the kind of stuff we're trying to probe into, is saying, like, how can we get a read on what's really important for a college website right now? Like, what are we going to need? What does this audience really want? Do they want to come here at all? Or are they going to just float between social media because that's where they already are, and they're going to use, a chat model to kind of do the comparison and contrast like your friend's doing already? That's really the interesting question for us to understand. The website needs to become both a source for all of that information and probably explaining the experience a little bit better. But it'll be really interesting to see sort of what models and what platforms people want to use that for.
Yeah. I'm old enough to have started college before my university had a website and end college when it had a website. And my observation over the past 27 years from when I graduated, I guess 30-ish if we count when I started college, is that websites started out very compact and then they ballooned up into everybody put everything on it. It was the archive for everything. I've talked about this before, but I know Arizona State, for example, has over 18 million pages on their websites, which is wild.
That's a crazy number.
But I was working with a client who was trying to go from 75,000 to narrow it down. And we were benchmarking what similar schools had. And we took that one out because it was skewing the metrics pretty heavily. But, they've ballooned up. And I remember in 2008, my vice president at the time said, I want to run out of clicks. There needs to be an end to the content. Mm-hmm. This can't just go forever where there's always stuff. And that's a very like linear way of looking at it. You're never really going to run out of clicks. But like this idea of we only have content out there that's serving what we're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And we're not using it as an archive of all the things that we have done.
That's a great point. Yeah. I think getting out of that would be a great way of saying, like, I think getting out of the website as an archive mentality, right? It's a business tool. And that's a really good point about the running out of clicks, because and this I would say is outside of higher ed, have done some testing around very compact sites for lead generation. And there's something about watching a user, like, there's enough content, and really we're talking small, like 8 to 10 pages, but there's enough to like click through that they get back to the same spot. And then they realize, oh, I need to take an action. And you have that action being really clear. Oh, I need to actually reach out. Like I've gotten enough that I'm interested, but there's not more for me to keep looking. And this is why we build landing pages for digital marketing, is because our research says if you let someone just come to a program page, the driving behavior when we ask them what's going on is that they want to feel like, oh, I'm a smart person. I should be able to find the answer. It's probably here. And they will just wander away and start looking. And then you never get that lead, right? So you paid to get them to your site and they won't get there. So that's why we develop a landing page, which is another way of saying, we're going to give you no clicks. Right. We're going to bring you in. We're going to tell you enough information to get you to say, Okay, I'll talk to someone about that, and then get them to take that action. And I think that's right. Like, I think if you really want to drive that engagement behavior, tighter sites are really the way to go, and a clear call to action everywhere. Like,
Yeah.
that is actually what will move folks forward that way.
I'm glad to hear that validated.
I mean, I do think the archive thing is a real problem, and it's hard to move people off of that that kind of point of view, and just believing that everyone needs a website and that everyone's important and there's equal, like, and we address that through website redesign, through hierarchy and menus and structures, and we can create good pathways for people to explore all of that. But when you get into governance, this is where the governance model, I think, comes in a lot, which is really, how long can that site stay up with no one updating it? What does that really look like? Those are right. Like, that's where governance can be really helpful in honing that in, but that's always a sticky wicket, as they say. So.
For sure. There's a website on Radford University's website. It was still there as of maybe 6 months ago, that my team never migrated into the CMS because they insisted, with their every breath in their body, that all multiple thousands of pages had to be migrated, because otherwise they would lose their archive. And it was like, I kind of was like, I'm pushing this off. My boss is like, I'm pushing this off. Apparently, I left that job 11 years ago. Everybody since then has pushed it off, dealing with that particular faculty member. But I mean, that the idea of that's where you store stuff is just, it's a mentality that happened before there was governance around web.
Right.
And I worry about that from an AI perspective, that there's not going to be governance around how we use AI, and we're going to get into something we can't predict today is going to happen if we don't get that governance around it. So I'm a big fan in a lot more intentional AI adoption on campuses.
And that's part of what we can get out of this AI Visibility Scorecard is really looking to see, which pages are being indexed, right? So another thing that people will get is like, hey, here are the kind of core pages that are being used and pulled. Is there anything, right? And sometimes it's hard for us as an outsider to know that should be in or out, right? And so we can just provide that to people and say, is there anything here where you're like, whoa, red flag, why is that showing up? Like, we got to go have a conversation for real, right? And I think that's part of what this scan perspective is saying, right? It's fine if it gets picked up for something weird. Like, I always tell this story about, we have one client from an SEO perspective, and the number one page on their site was a thing about butterflies and how caterpillars become butterflies. And this was like the top organic search result on their site. Now that in my opinion, like, adds zero value to the school, right? And frankly, it was there, and every like kindergarten teacher who had to get some information came and searched and found that page, and it's the first click, and it just was a self-perpetuating cycle. So they just kept getting it, but it doesn't add any value to it. Right now, you could say, like, do we need to take that down? Like, probably not, right? Because it's not a prospective student reaching that experience, right? And so I think what we're trying to do is really, with this AI scorecard, is like, look at that from like a prospective student point of view and saying, like, are there any red flags here, right? So it doesn't matter that the butterfly thing shows up sometimes when someone searches butterflies. That doesn't matter to us. But if you're a prospective student asking about our school, and we're grabbing this site that's 11 years old, right, and pulling some content from it, like, well, now's the time to go and have that conversation to say that can no longer be here because it's just impacting stuff. So, or we hide it from search, or we do something, right? We got to do something.
And I guess, part of it is, like, in the olden days, it was harder to hide stuff from search. Like, that you had to, like, kind of rely on the people putting kind of garbage up on the website, not using good SEO to keep the content from being found. This has been so great. If a CMO is listening today, or a web director, or, a content strategist, what's one thing they could do in the next 90 days to prepare for this AI-driven future?
I'm just going to say, like, I think investing in SEO is a great first start, right? I think if we'd be happy to run a scorecard for folks or help them, take a look at that. But I think if you're really thinking about it, it is, I think, taking that seriously, and I think really thinking about SEO is going to help you both in search, which is still going to be there, and it's going to help you in the AI experience as well. So I frankly would say, really invest in that. And I think we're getting a lot of interest in people talking about SEO. And I think people don't know, like, how to really attack that. And I think the main strategies you really want to think about are look at your program pages, look at like how you show up for what I think about as branded search, which would be like, your school name and admissions deadlines. Like, is the right page showing up? Is it the best page possible? Like, optimize for that. And then think about, like, is there a content marketing strategy where you're trying to reach people at the top of the funnel, which is writing some sort of article that's really helpful for people and answering a question that your prospective student might want to know, like, how do I get into this career, or what tools should I learn for this career? Those are great articles to write. And if you have authoritative content that is really just focused on answering those questions, that can be great lead generation content. And those areas are the ones where I think we really need to focus in on. Not just getting more organic traffic in general is not the right strategy. The right strategy is, what are the pages we really want to be found for from a prospective student experience? Let's optimize those. And those have a huge impact, both for your, bringing in more enrollment, but also just improving your overall brand perception.
I love that. This has been so fantastic. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people find you if they want to ask some more questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm available on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you've got my post or profile you can link there, and also at oho.com.
Awesome. And listeners, as always, you can find me on my website, which is solvehighered.com, or on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can also find my book, Heart Over Hype, at heartoverhypebook.com. And please feel free to reach out. I always enjoy chatting with listeners and providing insights if I have them. But until then, let's go bust some silos. Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and contact drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.